So Chad Makowski, again, thank you very much for having us here. And Mayor, I want to give you a special thanks for your advocacy on our board of directors as well with the DFW International Airport. So thank you for allowing us to be here. Just briefly, we wanted to bring you through a bit of a presentation to share with you some of the work that we're doing at the airport, let you know how that might impact your residents here with the city of Coppell. And we also are interested in learning more about what your interests are as well, because quite frankly, we have to have this symbiotic relationship, I think, to make sure that we know what you're working on, you know what we're working on, so we can move forward together in the best interests of our residents. We at the airport humbly believe that we want to represent and be the very first and last point of, as customers come through our airport, we want them to be thinking of the residents and the communities we serve as they're coming and going. We know we're the first and last impression that many of them have of our community. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over to Ms. Sandy Lancaster, who is our environmental program manager, and she's going to take you through a very short slide deck to share with you some of the work that we're working on. Thank you.
Thank you, Chad. Thank you, Mayor and Council. Appreciate the opportunity to brief you tonight. A couple of these slides we'll run through pretty quickly. These are some statistics about DFW and some of the mutual benefits that we share in our close proximity to one another. We have a DFW noise program. Some of the elements of that are we measure noise, we monitor flights, we work with the city for compatible land use, and noise is measured based on a cumulative average that determines what's compatible. So that's the benchmark, and we continue engagement with the communities for complaints and for notifications as when operations change due to runway closures or other things. Our noise policy contours kind of guide and direct the compatible development, and Coppell's been very proactive in that regard in developing its community, so the western portions lend themselves to more compatible development with aircraft operations. Typical airport operations are aircraft takeoff and land into the wind, and primarily we operate out of the south flow, so south winds about 70% of the year, which means aircraft are coming in from the north and landing to the south, and those arrival paths for a couple of our runways take them over the city of Coppell, primarily our easternmost north-south runway. So the graphic on the left shows our south flow operations, and the green arrows are the arrivals. So you see arrivals on the easternmost north-south runway. And then in north flow operations, which today we're in north flow, we depart, but we do not use that runway for departures. It's an arrival-only runway. And then we also close that runway at night, as well as our diagonals, and consolidate our operations to the main runways closest to the terminals, and that reduces the effects of noise on the communities. So we have a couple of videos to show you just as aircraft. This is a typical south flow day. This is about 7 o'clock. This is the 7 to 8 o'clock time frame. So aircraft are coming in from the north, which is the top of the page. It's about 7:20 when they start using that outboard runway, when the number of ops requires the use of that runway. We're also looking at other airports. So you see some turns coming in on the right-hand side. Those turns coming in, those are actually coming into Love Field. So that does have an influence on the city of Coppell as well. And then a north flow pattern is essentially the same thing in reverse, but now the aircraft are taking off to the north. And they go out on several different routes. One of the routes is a northeasterly turn. So they go out about a mile, they take a northeasterly track for about 5 miles, and then they turn. And so that does fly some aircraft over the northwest corner of Coppell. But you can see we're using both sides of the airfield with our operations. And again, some operations from other airports are shown on this screen. So we have noise monitors in the city. Northeast 3 on Creekview Drive measures operations, arrivals to 17 Center and departures. And then Northeast 6 and 7 measure the arrivals for 17 left. So again, you can see those noise monitors in relation to the flight tracks. So they measure noise all the time. They measure all noise. But then we take the noise data that's downloaded each night, and we merge that with flight track data to determine of the total noise, how much can be attributed to aircraft. Talking about community engagement, looking at complaints. We've had about 40 complaints from Coppell residents year to date for 2017, which is about consistent with our previous years. You can see the graph on the bottom right kind of shows our patterns over the last few years. And in the upper right-hand corner shows the typical reasons why we receive complaints. Sometimes it's normal operations, normal arrivals, normal departures. Other times it's the things that change, late night operations related to flex schedules or weather or other things like a runway closure that might change the time when aircraft operate or the frequency of operations on a particular runway. We do receive all complaints, we respond to complaints, and our flight tracking tools enable us to actually look at what flights actually occurred, so we can present them with factual information and help them understand where they live in relation to flight paths. So we do not control the flights. So somebody calls and complains, it's really our job to help to understand what they experienced and then explain how that relates to our operations at the airport. And we do have information on our website so that folks can find it there. And I appreciate the fact that the City of Coppell also puts that information on their website when we share information about runway closures. So some of the things that change aircraft operations, FAA has a next-gen program. In 2005, we implemented RNAV departures. So that's a precision departure path. I'll show you a graphic in a moment. Our runway rehabilitation program, which started in 2010. Converging runway operations are when two runways that do not physically intersect, but their paths intersect within a mile, then that applies. And so this graphic kind of shows you that. So it limits the FAA's ability to land aircraft on our west diagonal, runway 13 right. So essentially that's reduced the use of that runway from about 100 to 150 operations a day down to about 50 or so. So those aircraft had to be redistributed to other runways. Some of those came to runway 17 left, which affects Coppell, but they were also distributed to other runways. So not just that one, but this has had a significant effect not only on communities, but on the airport's capacity, and we've been working very closely with the FAA trying to find ways that we can find solutions to potentially mitigate our CRO. The next gen at DFW Airport, this is kind of a view of what that looks like. So prior to next gen on the left-hand side, and then with those next gen corridors on the right-hand side. Another thing that occurred is American Airlines rebanking, where there's peaks and valleys during the day of operations, which some people prefer. Some people prefer the more continual operations, but it does. It's like rush hour in the morning where there's a lot of people trying to get one place at one time. So a lot of aircraft on a certain runway. So that makes it more challenging. And then growth in operations, weather, American has flex schedules they operate. It was just 7 days during the summer, and we're done with those, but they do those during their summer periods. So let me advance through this. So our upcoming airfield work, our runways and airfield is 40 years old, so we do anticipate continual maintenance, but our easternmost primary arrival runway 17 center is going to need to be rehabilitated. We're designing that now. We're looking at possibly 2018 to do that work, but we are working with our internal stakeholders to try and find ways to minimize the closure period and as well as piggyback other projects onto that work so that we can reduce time that runways are closed. When we have more information, we will certainly share that as soon as we have dates. And then our End Around Taxiway system, which when built will enable aircraft to taxi around the end of runways rather than cross active runways. It's safer and it's more efficient, but it will not change flight patterns or runway use, so there's no change to noise with our End Around Taxiway system. And that concludes my presentation, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much. We had this presentation also in work session, so there have been already a lot of questions. Are there any other questions or anything specific that you would like? Councilmember Mays.
Thank you, Mayor. Sandy, I'm sorry we didn't talk about this earlier, but it looks like your software for plotting noise has gotten pretty sophisticated. We went through this exercise with you guys about a year ago, as I recall, And I was wondering if anything with the new plotting would have changed the results that we came up with back before we reenacted or changed some of our ordinances.
It did not. It's the same data, it just feeds into a more robust program, so we have a lot more tools and capabilities, but it's the same data.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes, a great question.
Any other questions, comments? Again, we thank you and all of the staff that was here this evening. We appreciate our partnership. And thank you for sharing all this information, because it is something that people do ask us on a regular basis, and you may be able to restore Councilmember Roden's credibility. Anyway,
But
thank you.
Thank you
Appreciate
very
it.
much. We very much appreciate the opportunity, and always a resource if you need us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.